In this video, we're going to see how we can set up a dDo project. We're going to go over all the steps of preparation, and once we get it set up, how we can adjust some settings to create a proper work environment. So why don't we go over the type of maps we need to have by now to get 3Do working. All right, we need to have an ambient occlusion map. That's we did a normal map conversion into AO. It gave us something like that. Of course, we have our normal map that we've been working on in Indu, and the last map we need to have is a color ID map. All right. What we need to do next is check to make sure that our color ID map is really nice and ready to go inside of Quixel. So why don't we look and see all the different things about our color map that we need to check to make sure it functions properly as we assign materials to these color islands. First of all, we need to make sure that all the color islands are in the correct space. And what I mean by that is making sure that, if you want to have a decal or a certain color, that you've got it marked correctly, and exposing your UV map and even lowering the opacity of my color ID map. Let me just name this. Just lowering the opacity of your color ID map to like 70. You can see the underlying normal detail below. And you can see I have these nice color islands on top of these triangles right here. But if I look over here to my cockpit, let's turn off my UVs because I'm looking at the underlying normals. You can see the bottom of my cockpit brace. It doesn't quite match up with the color here. So we're going to have to go back in and fix that in a second. Next, let's look at the color island hues distinct from one another. For the most part, this looks pretty good. There might be an issue, though, with this yellow right here. If we just zoom in, we might have an issue with this yellow and this more orangish yellow. They're obviously different from one another, but Quixel 3Do specifically needs to have a little bit more distinctness between the color islands, just so it can differentiate those different islands and different parts of your model. Because if not, you can get confused. So if you're trying to apply a glass texture to your cockpit, it'll apply it to the well in your engine right here. That's what that island represents. So we need to make sure that our islands are separate hues. So I need to go in and, again, this cockpit's giving me more trouble. All right, so I'll go in and fix that in a second. And then we need to make sure the borders of our islands are really sharp and not blurry at all. So if we zoom in, we can see that especially on the vertical and horizontal shapes, we get this nice distinction of color. The diagonals are going to have a little bit of aliasing and a little bit of feathering on them, but that's not too bad. That should be acceptable for Quixel. But if we go over to the cockpit, we can see that maybe this is just a little fuzzy, and what we might end up happening is detail not being properly applied. In fact, this could be seen as a brand new color in between the orange and yellow, and then we will have to we'll have basically gray scenes because there won't be a material applied to this no man's land right there. So now I'm going to go through and show some steps on how to fix these issues, even if you have a collapsed color ID map. Of course, if you were smart and kept all your color ID layers separate, then this would be an easier process. But, maybe seeing some workflows on some destructed, flattened layers could help us all out and bring this back to life for us. All right, the first thing I want to do is make sure that I have my detail where it needs to be and that it's nice and sharp. We can see I'm a little off here with this detail. You can see the top of this little cockpit here and then the bottom. It's almost like it's completely shifted over in a way. In fact, this cockpit has been overdrawn. So I'm going to go in and use my curve tool again to help and reconstruct this. And I'll skip through some of the parts after I show the basic workflow. But for right now, why don't we just go in and repair this thing. So I'm going to start out by just getting rid of this orange right here. So I'm going to use the magic wand tool. So I select the selection wand and then select magic wand. And I'm basically just going to turn this all yellow. Or actually, I'm going to create a brand new color for all of this because this yellow was too similar to the engine. Well, um, so I'm going to go something that's a little more brown. I don't really have a brown color in here, so that should be good. So I'm going to use my magic wand tool to select these islands, and then with my color selected, I can hold Alt and Backspace and fill these islands in. And I'm just going to go ahead and erase all that detail here. Go in with a brush, really big. And I'm not worried too much about staining the UV islands right now. I can go back and fix that. But I'm just getting rid of all this blur. See how blurry that is? That was left over. That's the line. That's the scene Quixel would have completely just abandoned for us. All right. So the next thing I'm going to do is I got to sharpen up this selection right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer above my color ID map down here. Let's get that out of the way. And I'm going to work on my cockpit on an outside layer. That'll help me just keep my mask sharp and make sure everything is functioning really well. So again, I'm going to select my magic wand tool and make sure I'm on my color ID layer. Otherwise, we won't be able to select that brown island anymore. Select the brown island with the magic wand, and then come in here with my layer 1 and just do another fill with Alt and Backspace. So if I hide my color ID layer, you can see that I get this island right here. All right. The next thing to do is to make sure that my island meets the dimensions of my normal map. So I'm going to come down here. You know what? First, I'm going to make sure that there's no more brown island on this original color map. So I'm going to use my eyedropper by pressing the I key. I'm going to get that green. And now I'm going to come in. Now that I have a specifically brown layer, I'm going to come in now and just get rid of this brown layer by just painting over it and just making it all green again. I find that it's best to work with layers with Color ID Mask because it just helps you manage the sharpness and position of these islands. So maybe that's a little blurry. Let's see what we can do with this brown island. You know what? Actually, why don't we make sure that it's following my normal map around my cockpit really well. All right. So I'm going to hide the color ID map below. And you can see that this map was just drawn really hastily. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in and you can either try to erase. And we want to make sure our brushes are hard. Remember, we're trying to avoid hardness. You can try to erase if you have a nice Wacom tablet around it to get the detail the way you want it. But that could take a really long time. What I'm actually going to do, I'm going to use a pen tool to draw out a selection. All right, and I'm not just going to use any pen tool. I'm going to hold down the left click and come down here and select Curvature Pin Tool. And then it lets you just click points around a curve, and they kind of just naturally start to align with the curve. And if you mess up, you can hold down Control and left click and reposition, release Control, and then you're back drawing points. So being able to see my normal map down here is really helping me draw the points exactly where I need them. And right here, we might have some trouble with the curve tool, not exactly of conforming, but we always can go in and space out things. I find that the more spaced things are, kind of the worse they get. If you hold Alt, then we can kind of start positioning it by resetting the tool. Oh, if you need to get rid of a point, just press the delete. There we go. I'm just going to keep following this detail. all the way around like so. Alright, so I was only worried about that outside detail. So all this out here, I'm just going to start drawing and connecting it all together. And then I'm going to select selection with no feather radius. Let's make sure that's 0, but we do want to anti-alias it. So there is a better drawn out cockpit. You can see if I just hide my original layer, that's miles above the original one. Alright, so let's go in and fill this up with that brown again. I have this original layer that I was able to pull out of my color ID map, but since we're starting out fresh, let's delete it. And then make a new layer, and with this newly drawn out selection, let's fill it with brown. And if we look, we can see we get a harder line that's not as blurry. Again, diagonal parts or curvy parts, they're going to have that natural stair-stepping effect because, we're dealing with individual square pixels. All right. If you want to clean up this island, then you can always click on your main color ID map or your master mask map, and it'll select all the islands in your Photoshop thing. Do an inverse selection and press the delete key, and it'll delete everything outside of that mask for us. So it'll clean things up a little bit. All right. Next, we got to go in there and draw out these braces. And I'm going to pause this and use that pen tool to do this so we don't see me painstakingly make a bunch of points. So I'll be right back. But before I go and do this, I'm going to explain how I'm going to do it. First, I'm going to create another layer. So I have my brown cockpit layer. This layer is going to house not the brace, but the glass inside. I feel like tracing out the glass pieces inside the cockpit would be a lot faster than having to trace this whole brace all the way around. All right, so I'm going to go back and do that, and let's look at the results. So I've killed 3 birds with one workflow by changing the hues of the cockpit so they don't get confused with other ones on the map. Going in and making sharper, less blurry edges. You kind of almost want to see some of the stair-stepping aliasing. That just means it's nice and sharp. And we've gone through and made sure that our normal detail underneath has been tracked. Okay, so that makes a good color ID map right there. All right, so what I need to do now is export this as a color ID map. So I'll take off my normal map, and you know what? I'm going to put a nice layer at the bottom, right underneath my color ID layer, a nice black. And hopefully none of your color ID maps are black. We always want to have maybe like a pure black as our background for our color ID map, just so we know we have a base color to kind of fill around our islands that we're not going to use in our color ID map. All right, let's go to Save As, and let's save it as a target and our exports folder. So let's, instead of calling this underscore mesh, let's call it underscore color ID. I think Quixel calls it material ID, but you'll be able to get the difference. All right, great. So our color map is now made. Why don't we look and see how we can go in and create our dDo project. So what I'm going to do next is open up Quixel. I'm going to go ahead and save my Undo PSD and get rid of it. And we're going to click on in the top left of the screen up here. We're going to go in and click on the D for dDo. And again, it's just a matter of plugging in maps. So let's go and plug in our game model. Okay. Warning about the UVs being outside the 0 to 1 range for mirrored UVs. That's fine. Material ID, let's select our color ID map. And let's just inspect it a little bit. Looks good. All the islands look good. Every once in a while, you may find that it messes with your color ID target and that they've input seams there. So just go back and make sure that your maps look good when you import them. You don't want to start a project on a bad foot. All right, looks good. And then let's plug in our ambient occlusion. Looks good. We don't have a curvature map, so why don't we get dDo to bake it and just leave all of these other maps down here alone. So you want to have your material ID, your normal, and your AO linked, and then object space, normal, curvature, and position gradient. We'll let Quixel bake those for us using dDo. All right, the next thing we're going to do is change our export target. Okay, it may have specular PBR by default, or you may want to do, whatever, but we have a lot of different engines represented here. And we like to use Unity 5 metalness workflow. This is the default shader inside of Unity, and it allows us to have better exports from Quixel to Unity. All right, and the next thing we're going to do is pick a place to save this. So I'm going to go to my Vic Viper. Let's make a new folder. Call this Vic Viper dDo. Okay, so I think it'll go ahead and select that folder for us. Vic Viper dDo. So after you create the folder, make sure you go back and select it. Perfect. And let's go ahead and hit create. It's going to go through a bunch of baking and map making. You can see that it's accessing dDo right there to make some maps. Gets rid of it. So the process to create a project in dDo is a little bit more involved, or rather, the process to create one in dDo is a little more involved than nDo. But as you can see, it kind of gives us almost the same kind of work environment of a PSD and a context-sensitive little toolbar over here that helps us get going. So why don't we see what it created? So if we go and look in my project folder and go to my dDo folder that I just made, we can see it's got a little bit more going to it than just a PSD and a preview folder, right? This project XML file right here, this is going to be how we open and resume our work inside of Quixel. Our previewer, of course, is for dDo. We have our FBX and various maps right here. Our bakes, this is what was created in dDo, and these help us create way better maps and detail while we're using the program. And each one of these PSDs is an active map that dDo is creating for us as we apply materials to our model. And while we're at it, why don't we go ahead and set up dDo again so we can see our model. And dDo is going to be way more important in this workflow. So make sure you have a good dDo environment set up. As you can see, it's got my ambient occlusion map attached, as well as my normal. And model's looking pretty good right now. Looks a little bit better with our AO map in there. You can see we have lots of cool detail down there, being accentuated even more by our self-shadowing AO map that we derive from our normal. Why don't we go ahead and set our post-processing options up here at the top. Let's click Show Back Faces just in case. Let's turn on Screen Space Ambient Occlusion and turn it down just a little bit. This is going to detect AO between meshes instead of just based on our normal map. Simulate Physical Camera, turn off Chromatic Aberration. And let's scale up our vignetting so we can get a nice background gradient in there. And then why don't we go into our solid background and just lighten it up a little bit. Perfect. I'm going to go in and change the lighting to the third option to get a more neutral, less warm lighting. There are different kinds of lighting setups just pick one that you want to do and constantly be changing between the lights so you can get a different feel for how your materials are working during your creation process. Because lights are going to be different inside of a game, so we got to make sure that we're at least looking at various different lighting setups going on. All right, perfect. So we get a good view all the way around of our model this way. Nice. All right. One thing that I want to show us to remember real quick is if we press spacebar, we hide our menu. So the spacebar just does that for us. If we want to rotate our lights around our model, we hold down Shift and right click. If we want to rotate our lights, revolve it around in the vertical direction, hold down Shift and Control. And it does a little bit of a different rotation. So good if you want to see the bottom side of your model a little bit more lit up, and then we can rotate it from there. So don't forget about your light controls. Constantly be moving your light around. See how your normals are reacting to real-time lighting. All right, so now is a good time to go ahead and save our project. So I'm going to slide dDo out of the way. And we're going to go to the little save option right here. Save all maps. And it'll save everything for us real quick. All the PSDs up here. And, you can click on them. There's a color ID map right there. And it's still looking good. It's got a gloss matte, metalness, albedo, and then our normal. None of these have anything on them right now because we haven't made any maps, any materials on our model yet. So albedo is probably the one you'll probably be looking at the most since it's your color map. But be checking around all your different maps up here. The next thing we're going to do is save our project. So if we go to the drop-down menu, save our project. I'm pretty sure that saves our maps too, but any other settings we might have in 3Do, we can, or dDo rather, we can save them to make sure they're set up the way we remember it being whenever we were working on it last. All right, and why don't we cover how we can open up our project after closing it down and maybe going home and working on it. So I'm going to go ahead and close out. If I close out the project, it's asked if I want to save there. So, why not always be saving? And I want to close out 3Do. And then I'm going to go and open up dDo again, like I just launched Photoshop and Quixel. And then I'm going to go to the drop-down bar right here. Let me zoom in. So we've got a little drop-down bar right here. We'll go to Load Project, navigate to your dDo folder, and select project.xml. Very important to have a folder dedicated just to dDo as well as nDo. So make sure those folders are very separated from one another. And then we can open up our 3Do project, or our dDo project, and our 3Do as well. And hopefully all of our settings are saved the way we had them. All right, great. So this does it for this video. In the next video, we're going to see how we can start quickly applying base materials to the various parts of our mesh.